Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be giving you my updated prediction for the 2024 Senate elections for the month of July. It's been about a month since my last prediction, and I hope you guys had having a great day. I am going to be on vacation for the next week, so don't expect any videos from me. I might post a poll or two, or say make a comment on something or, somewhere, but I will not be uploading any videos. And, I'm kind of just working on my own schedule. Whenever, I have the energy to upload a video or make one, I will. And when I get back next week, that'll be a, you know, that'll be a great, and I'll be able to make some more videos for you guys. So, yeah, and I'll try to be more active in, the month of August than I have been since, the start of the summer. So, anyways, let's get into the 2024, Senate prediction. Democrats are facing a very hard map, but, the good news for them is that the GOP is, quite likely to, it's very plausible that the GOP picks very bad candidates in states that they need to win, like Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia, as well as other states that they might be targeting like Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada, all of which Democrats hold. I mean, Arizona is technically an independent because Kirsten Sinema is no longer an official Democrat, but she caucuses with Democrats in the Senate, so we can count her as such. But Democrats are facing a very difficult map, very similar to the one in 2018, where they actually net lost a seat because they lost incumbents in rural red states like North Dakota, Missouri, and Indiana, and they also lost their incumbent in Florida, but they did flip Arizona and Nevada, which minimized the damage for them, and it got made it so that the GOP only netted a total of one seat in the U.S. Senate. And while Democrats did very well last cycle, they can't necessarily, and that was not necessarily, I'm not saying that that was any easy task, especially in a year that really should have been a Republican, it really should have been, it really should have gone to Republicans easily, but it ultimately did, and it was a pretty close election, pretty similar to 2020. And then the Senate elections, that was, particularly the case because Democrats won 51 seats. Sorry, I did not remember that I was in that. But you can see they won 51 seats. They won many of their competitive seats and flipped Pennsylvania with John Fetterman. And now, when we're looking at 2024, we're seeing a more difficult map for the Democrats, but they're also, they can also, there's also a possibility that they may be able to use the GOP's, lack of ability to fund or to nominate strong candidates to their advantage. So now we're going to start off by filling out the safe Democratic and Republican states. For the Democrats, I have them up at 41 right now. Not, most of these are pretty self-explanatory. New Mexico, New Jersey. You might be able to argue because, New Mexico's not usually safe, but Martin Heinrich, I do think, is set to win by over 15 again. He won by, a safe margin in 2018, mainly due to the fact that it was in part due to the fact that, there was a libertarian, Gary Johnson, who took a lot of votes away from the GOP. But I do think that right now it doesn't look like he has a lot of strong opposition, and I do still think he would have won by a safe margin in 2018, even if it had been a two-way race. And then in New Jersey, Bob Menendez, not a very good incumbent, but I do expect him to perform better, than he did in 2018. Even though the national environment is redder, that does not always mean that every Senate seat is going to shift, or even though the national environment in 2024 is likely to be redder than 2018, that doesn't mean every single Senate seat is going to vote for is going to that this margin by which every state votes for us, the Democrats or Republicans is going to be smaller. It's going to be redder than it was in 2018. And I think Bob Menendez is really not facing as much of a challenge as they did last cycle. So I do think he'll win by over 15, and he'll underperform Joe Biden. He could win by a likely margin, but I think if he does, it'd be like 14.7, 14.9. I really think, you know, it could be by less, but I think right now I'm comfortable saying that he would win by around, 15 percentage points, pretty close, if not over 15 points. There are some, most of the retirements this cycle are in safe blue states, and there's, obviously Mike Braun is retiring in Indiana, which is a safe Republican seat. Jim Banks is almost certain to succeed him in that race, but there are going to be competitive or interesting primaries to watch in California, Maryland, and Delaware, where Democrats have retiring incumbents, but all of them won't be competitive in the general election. I think California is the most interesting because I think we could see a Democrat on Democrat, a Democrat versus Democrat runoff, or general election runoff because California will always have, it has an open primary system, and if two Democrats, say Katie Porter and Adam Schiff advance to the general, they're both come in first and second place. They could, face off in the general election, and that would, basically make the whole, California Senate race, basically contingent, on basically make it one big primary for the Democrats in a sense. Minnesota's not usually safe either for the Democrats, but I do think it would be safe in this case with Amy Klobuchar. And in Nebraska, there are two special elections because Ben Sass, the other senator from the seat, decided to resign early. So Pete Ricketts, the former governor, was appointed to that seat, and yeah, he's going to win easily in Nebraska. So we have 13 states that are not safe necessarily. Some of these, are much closer to being, are much more competitive than others. We're going to start off with the likely states, which are not super competitive, but they'll be decided by between 5 and 15 points. It's a big gap, but we'll start off with the likely Republican states. The first one is Missouri. This is, a state that's pretty close to being safe, but Josh Hawley is not a great candidate for, the suburbs of Missouri, and Democrats look like, with Lucas Coons being their presumptive nominee, in my eyes, they can make the race somewhat close. I think Hawley underperforms Trump by a bit because of, the urban and suburban areas shifting against him and towards Lucas Coons. I think Coons outperforms Joe Biden in those areas, but I still think, Hawley wins by, 12, 13 points. Not a very competitive election. In Florida, this is another likely state. Florida's become a lot more Republican in recent years, but Rick Scott is not a, necessarily a great candidate. He's won all three of his elections by very narrow margins, but he was the former governor of the state. He won twice, in 2010 and 2014, and then he won in 2018. So he's faced, he beat a Democratic incumbent in Bill Nelson in 2018. He's, he knows what it's like to be in a competitive race. And Florida Democrats, after their collapse last year, don't really have a clear nominee forward. I've heard rumors that Debbie Murkowski Powell, who was a former congresswoman from the Miami area, might run for the Senate seat, but she does not seem super enthusiastic about it. Alan Grayson, another former congressman from the Orlando area, has filed paperwork to run. So there are a lot of, potential candidates for this race. Scott is, not going to win by 17 points like Rubio did in 2022. The turnout's not going to be nearly that bad. And this will be Scott's first time running in a presidential year. So, I do think he'll underperform Trump, who I do expect to be the GOP nominee for president. It could be DeSantis, but I'm not holding my breath for that. And yeah, I do think that Rick Scott will win by around 5 to 6 points. It'll be a little bit narrower than Trump's margin in the state, but yeah, Democrats are really having a hard time, with Latino voters in the state shifting right, and also just with turnout in general. Florida turnout was especially bad for Democrats last year. Unusually so for a midterm election. So, yeah, and they're also losing in party registration in the state too. Florida has historically been a very has had has had solid Democratic registration. It was just that a lot of those Democrats would vote for Republicans, but now it just seems to be with the times with politics becoming more polarizing. Republicans are now now I think they've overtaken Democrats in voter registration in the last couple of years. And then our final likely red state is the state of West Virginia. Now, Joe Manchin is the Democratic incumbent here. This is, kind of You might be surprised to see that an incumbent is losing by this much. And West Virginia is a but that's because West Virginia is a very Republican state. It's right trending. Joe Manchin has been able to do well in years past. He won in his first election in 2010. To replace retiring Senator Rob, or not retiring, the late Senator Robert Byrd. Then he won his full term in 2012 by an impressive 24 points, even as Obama lost every county in the state. But then in 2018, which was it was a bluer national environment than 2012 overall, Manchin only won by 3 points. And granted, he was up against the former Attorney General or current Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, who was the GOP nominee. And he was in that regard, he had experience. He was a well-known candidate, but Morrisey did not run the best campaign, and also Manchin had a substantial advantage over him for most of the campaign cycle. So it was really it was kind of surprising to see how close Manchin came to losing, and that was in a very Democratic environment. And so now in 2024, with it being a presidential year and with Republicans likely to run the governor, Jim Justice, it really seems like Manchin is in a lot of trouble here. I think that he'll outperform Joe Biden by, a lot. I think can get like to, 41% of the vote, maybe 42. I won't be super specific here. I can't talk today. But I do think that Justice, who's likely to be the nominee, or Alex Mooney, the other major contender of the Republican primary, would beat Joe Manchin. I really think that Biden being on the ticket and being so unpopular in West Virginia, and with Trump being so popular, is really going to hurt him. And it doesn't matter if Trump is on the ballot either. It could be DeSantis. It's just overall the rightward trend in West Virginia, which was already happening before Trump came along. He just accelerated it, is really going to hurt Manchin. Yes, he won in a presidential year in 2012, but that was back when the country was less polarized. And now I'll show you the map. Missouri was safe blue. Indiana was likely. Nevada had voted for Obama but elected a Republican, Montana, North Dakota, et cetera, et cetera. Florida was almost a safe margin for Bill Nelson. So, very, very weird times back then. Certainly not a Senate map you would see today. And so I do think that Joe Manchin loses re-election. Now for the likely Democratic states. The first one is Maine, and I've had this as a safe blue state for a while. Angus King, who's the independent senator who caucuses with the Democrats, has officially announced he's going to run for re-election, which isn't a huge surprise, but there was some speculation that he might retire. Either way, he is running again. I do think that he will outrun Joe Biden. I'm not sure by how much, and depending on how much Biden wins Maine by, which will probably be similar to his 9 point margin in 2020. King could win by less than 15, especially if a Democrat, the Democratic nominee for Senate, whoever that may be, takes away a good portion of the vote from him, which is something he's seen in elections past. If we look back to his previous elections here. You can see in 2018, he did win by a decisive amount against the Republican, but Ringelstein won, about 11% of the vote. Angus King got, 54%, and then in 2012 it was a similar deal. Cynthia Dill got 13%. Angus King got 53%. And so, yeah, I mean, they both got pretty if you combine the independent and democratic votes together, that would be 65, roughly 65% of the vote. And so that's really good from King's perspective. And Maine really does like their independence. It's got a thing, it's got an independent streak to it. But I think King is almost certainly guaranteed re-election. I'm just not sure by what margin he will win it by. Although I will admit that a part of my decision to move it down to likely was also to just change up the Senate map in a way that I think works, because I also I just don't want the Senate map to look too similar to the previous month or something. I guess I kind of spoiled the rest of my prediction. But if you haven't seen it, you're the lucky one, I guess, because you'll get to see the rest of my prediction. But overall, I will give some more in-depth analysis. Probably shouldn't have given away that part, but we'll keep going on. Virginia is also a likely Democratic state. Tim Kaine I do think could win by over 15. He did so in 2018. Um, but that was a bluer national environment than 2024 is likely to be. And if I'm going to put Missouri as a likely Republican state, I do think that, it makes sense for me to put Virginia as likely Democratic. I think that overall it just, makes sense. And I do think that, it's a bit fairer to do it in that sense. And also in Pennsylvania, our final likely state, this is, normally a very competitive state. In Pennsylvania will be, a key Senate race for Republicans in 2024. It's one that's been talked about a lot. But the incumbent Democrat, Bob Casey, is very, very likely to win. He's very popular. He's won 3 terms by substantial margins. He's almost certain to outrun Joe Biden. And while the Republicans have a good candidate in David McCormick, who's likely to run for the seat. I just don't think that he is good enough to beat Casey. I think he loses by 8 or 9 to the incumbent Democrat as of right now. So, yeah, and Pennsylvania's been very good for Democrats as of late. Unless there's a massive red wave, I really can't see Casey losing. Even if Biden loses the presidency, I really think Casey is pretty much guaranteed re-election. Although his race will be, relatively competitive. I think it'll be his closest race yet. Out of his 4, that he has run in, including, this one. So now we're down to the 7 remaining states, and you know, we're gonna go. These are the most competitive states, and we're gonna go through them one by one. We'll start off with the lean states, which are not the most competitive, but they're not quite in the toss-up category. But they definitely all are, worth talking about, and all are, except for Montana and Ohio, in your, the list of states that would be considered pretty competitive for the presidential election. So the first one we'll start off with is Michigan, which is a lean Democratic seat, according, in my opinion. Debbie Stabenow is retiring. This is the only one of these 7 states where the incumbent is retiring. So this is an open seat. And overall, that's, not a great thing for Democrats, but they have a good, candidate in Alyssa Slotkin, who is the congresswoman from Lansing. She is very, I would say she's a pretty strong candidate. She's not, the best candidate they could have put up. They could have put up Jocelyn Benson or, maybe Dana Nessel, the Attorney General of Michigan. Both of whom won by more. Won by more than Gretchen Whitmer. Well, not, Jocelyn Benson did. I don't think. I think Nessel actually underperformed Whitmer. But either way, these. I don't think that Slotkin is the best candidate, but Republicans also don't have, a clear nominee here. It could be Bill Huizenga, it could be Lisa McClain, 2 representatives, who have endorsed Donald Trump for reelection. I think the entire Michigan GOP congressional delegation endorsed Trump in the primaries, so that's good news for him in the Michigan state primary. But when it comes to the Senate election, I think, you're looking at someone like, Huizenga, McClain, or James Craig, the former, police chief of Detroit, who ran for governor in 2022 before being kicked off the ballot because he didn't have enough signatures. And, none of them would be terrible. I think McClain would be the worst of the 3. And I think that she's the most likely to run and, win the seat. Or not win the seat, but win the nomination. But I do think Slotkin, will have a similar performance to Joe Biden. I think, she wins by 4 to 5 points. It could be a little bit closer with Craig or Huizenga on the ballot, but overall I do think Slotkin's in a pretty good spot to win. Republicans, this is probably the least favorable seat for the GOP out of these 7 true battleground states for the Senate elections. They can win it in a best case scenario, but it is definitely not one that they really need. They need to win, they need to hold Texas and flip, Montana or Ohio or both, or, do something in Nevada or Arizona. That's really where their priorities are, and also target Wisconsin, which I also think is a lean Democratic state. This state actually does have a Democratic incumbent running for re-election, Tammy Baldwin. She's pretty popular, not, she's won by good margins in the past. She won her first race in 2012 by 6 points against a former governor, and then in 2018 she won by 11. And in 2018 she really didn't have, much, um, you know, the GOP really didn't fund her challenger. So it makes sense why she just wiped the floor with Leah Vukmir. And I do think that, she's going to have a much, this will be probably her closest race yet, but I do think that she's going to, outrun Joe Biden. I think that a lot of these Senate Democrats are going to outrun Joe Biden, except for, maybe one or two. Um, you know, but I do think that Tammy, Baldwin is a very strong candidate, and the Republicans, are looking at, at their candidate either being really Tom Tiffany, the representative from the northern part of the state, or David Clark, the former Milwaukee sheriff, who has, since become a Republican and has, a lot of baggage. I really do think that he would be a terrible candidate for them to run in this race. I do think that, so I do think that, either way, Baldwin does win. I think, right now I'd say against Tiffany, she wins, who I do think will be the nominee in the end. I do think, Baldwin would beat him by, 3 or 4 percentage points, slightly more than Biden would beat Trump by in the state. I think Biden currently wins Wisconsin by like 2, and Baldwin outruns him by 1 or 2 points because, it's getting to be a more polarized environment, and so I do think that drags down some of her crossover appeal, but she will definitely do better in the suburbs and the urban areas than Joe Biden. Although that's not really saying much because Democrats are doing well in those areas in general. Anyways, excuse me, I'm slurring my words. So Nevada is our final lean Democratic state. Nevada, while some people, including myself, have said that it's right trending, it's not right trending to the point where Democrats are doomed there. Clark County is, does show signs of becoming more Republican, and Nevada itself is, is a pretty, it's a pretty polarized state, but in a way that's good for Democrats because it usually leans Democratic and it votes Democratic narrowly. Even in 2022, when turnout was terrible for Democrats, Latino turnout was pretty low. Catherine Cortez Masto still defeated Adam Laxalt in the Senate race, and Joe Lombardo barely defeated Steve Sisolak in the governor's race. Lombardo was the Republican, Sisolak was the Democratic incumbent for context. So, really, Republicans really need to do, their absolute best to knock, in the suburbs and, to keep turnout relatively low, which will be difficult in a presidential year to knock off Jackie Rosen, the incumbent Democrat. And, they're not, they really have, a clear, I think there's a clear, preferred candidate, from the GOP establishment, and that's Sam Brown, who's a former, veteran, or he's a retired veteran, I believe, and he would, be a pretty average candidate. And then you have Jim Marchant, who is the former nominee for, Secretary of State in Nevada. He did very badly in 2022, lost to Cisco Aguilar by 2 points, and he's, I think, more likely to be the nominee. I do think that he would lose to Rosen by 3-ish points. So yeah, and I do think Rosen, like, Baldwin, Slotkin, and Casey would outrun Joe Biden in this case because, I do think that these Trump Senate candidates would do worse than Trump himself. And then our lone lean Republican state is the state of Texas. Ted Cruz, while not super popular, is still in a state that leans Republican. Texas is trending left. The suburbs are becoming more diverse, more, populated, and they're shifting against Trump, and I do think that will continue to happen. And while Colin Allred, I do think is a good candidate for Democrats, I just don't think that, I think like Michigan, it's just not one of those states that's really, the most plausible for them to win. I think Democrats' strategy to winning the Senate in 2024 is really, locking down, the Rust Belt, winning Ohio and Montana, holding on to Arizona, really trying their best, everywhere, but, it's going to be really hard for them to pick up a seat. It's just kind of, not the best, trying to flip Texas, it's definitely on the board. And Colin Allred so far has, posted some pretty strong fundraising numbers. But overall, I do think that Cruz will win this race. I do think that, he will, win by around 3 points. He'll underperform Trump. I do think Allred being from the Dallas area means that, he might he'll likely outperform Biden in those suburbs. and in Dallas itself, and that'll be good for Democrats. I think that if Trump wins Texas by under two, Cruz is in serious trouble, but I don't think that's going to happen as of right now. I think it'll be more a 3 or 4 point victory for Trump. So that is where I stand on Texas. Competitive, but like Michigan, not necessarily the it's on the board, but it's not the most attainable for Democrats. Just like Michigan's not the most attainable state for Republicans, and they don't. Dems don't necessarily need it to win the Senate. So now we're looking at these last free states. These are the free toss-up states, and we're looking at how where both parties are. Republicans are at 50, and if they win the presidency, which I do think is unlikely at this moment, they would already have the majority, but that is not what I'm forecasting, and we also don't know that. This map doesn't account for a 50-50 tie. And Democrats are at 47. So if Democrats want to win the Senate, they're going to have to win all three of these, while the Republicans just need to win one. And unfortunately for them, I do think that they are going to lose Ohio. Ohio, the Democrats have a really good incumbent in Sherrod Brown, who's won three elections, in a row, and he's the only statewide Democrat, statewide elected a Democratic official in Ohio, currently. But he faced a more competitive. He did not do as well as he should have in 2018 against a weak candidate, Jim Renacci, who didn't have any funding from the GOP and was pretty much caught off by the end of the summer. So Ohio was clearly not the GOP's biggest target in November 2018. They were mainly focused on Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, and states like Florida, as well as holding on Nevada and Arizona. And overall, Ohio was kind of abandoned by them. And Brown only won by 7 when he was supposed to win by 10 or 11. Sometimes in some polls more. Now, don't get me wrong, a Democrat winning by 7 in Ohio is still very, very, a very, very good performance. But again, it was less than it was expected. It was another example of Ohio polls overestimating Democrats and underestimating Republicans. But overall, I do think now that the GOP has really, is in a cycle where they really don't need to worry about flipping those deep red states. And Ohio is certainly not a deep red state, at least not right now. It's more of, a Republican leaning swing state, if anything. I do think that the Republicans are really going to play, in Ohio, really, make an effort for it all the way through to the very end, even if they nominate a bad candidate like Bernie Moreno, who, might lose the general election to Sherrod Brown. I really do think that, they're gonna, stick with it, because Ohio is one of their pathways to win the Senate majority. They really, if they lose Ohio, that's a really bad sign for them, nationally, because it really, really hinders their ability to win back the control of the chamber. And I do think that right now, Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State, will be the nominee against Brown and will beat him. I think if it's Bernie Moreno, it's more, 50-50. I would say, I mean, Ohio's going to be a very close state anyways. You can see it's in the tilt category, which means it's going to be, under 1 percentage point, decided under 1 percentage point. But I do think that, Moreno is more likely to lose to Brown than, either Matt Dolan or Frank LaRose. And polling backs this up. If you look at the polls for Ohio, you can see, that Matt Dolan performed the best against Brown, only losing by 1 point in this poll. Sherrod Brown beat Bernie Moreno by 4 in this poll, and then in this hypothetical matchup between LaRose and Brown, Brown beat him by 2%. Now, does that mean he's going to win against all of these candidates? No. There's still a lot of undecided voters, and we saw a lot of polls that were great for Tim Ryan in 2022 that ultimately didn't come to pass. But I do think that this race overall is very competitive. I just do think that Sherrod Brown, running in a presidential year in this time and age, and with Trump on the ballot, who's really going to do well in Ohio, in my opinion. I do think that he's not going to be able to come. I don't think that he's going to be able to combat that. And he win, and he could win, and that would not be that's not out of the question. But I do think that it is a little difficult for me to see that as of right now. Maybe in a year or two, maybe in a year when we know who the GOP nominee is going to be, and we have a clearer picture of the race, I might be more inclined to pick him, but we'll have to wait and see. And then we have these two last states, Arizona and Montana. I'll give them both to Democrats. We'll talk about Arizona first, which is likely to be a freeway race. Kyrsten Sinema is kind of the independent variable in this race because we're not sure if she's going to run. And she, I do think she'll take votes away from both Democrats and Republicans, and that could hurt Ruben Gallego. But Republicans are also going to have to play smart here and play, and put up a good, put up a good nominee who is, able to appeal to the suburbs and, does not scare independents into voting for, um, you know, Ruben Gallego instead of Kyrsten Sinema, because remember, Republicans can't just, sit back and expect Sinema to take away votes from, Gallego in particular. Polls show that she's taken away votes from both parties. Now, do I think she's going to get 20% of the vote? No, I think she's going to get more, 10%, but either way, it's going to be, she's going to take away a substantial portion. And I do think Gallego, is mostly going to, it's going to come mostly, most of those voters are going to be Democrats, but at the end of the day, I don't think it'll be enough to hinder Gallego. I don't think he's a bad enough candidate to lose, especially against likely a Trump, Republican a Trump styled Republican nominee. So yeah, that is my take on Arizona, and then in Montana, Jon Tester is a very strong incumbent. He's, been in very close races before, more so than Joe Manchin or Sherrod Brown. And, while Republicans are running Tim Sheehy, who is a strong candidate in his own right, I do think that Matt Rosendale is still leading over him in most polling. He is not announced, Rosendale has not announced his campaign yet, but, he's almost certain to run. And, while he might not get, most of the GOP establishment behind him, that does not always matter. Look at how John Fetterman, barely had any endorsements in the 2022 primary in Pennsylvania, and yet he became the nominee. Based on endorsements, Connor Lamb really should have won that primary, and yet he didn't. So I do think Rosendale will be the nominee once again and will lose to Jon Tester. Again, it's going to be hard for Democrats to win this race. They're going to have to count on Biden not completely faltering in Montana. He's going to have to only, lose the state by, for anywhere from 10 to 15 points. If he loses it by more than that, I'm really skeptical of Tester holding on. But, right now I think that, Biden loses Montana by, a small enough margin where Tester can overperform and eke out a narrow victory. So in the final map here, I do have Republicans favored to win 51 Senate seats, Democrats win 49, and the GOP flips Ohio and West Virginia. Again, Maine is really the only change from my previous map in June, where I had it as safe Democratic. Now I'm moving it down to likely. Apologies for kind of spoiling that. But you guys have, you get the picture. It's been like this for months. And I'm sure that the map will change a bunch once we get closer to the election cycle. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Sorry if my voice was a bit hoarse or just a bit a bit jumbled. I'm just kind of in a dehydrated state. I should really be drinking water. I have some right here. But anyways, thank you all for watching. If you like the video, subscribe, hit the like button, turn on notifications, share the video with someone who you think would enjoy it. Check out my non-political channel, Interactive127, and my second channel, and my comrades channel, Growlingzoo666. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.